Hello there. Now this is an interesting development. Could our venerated Prime Minister Keir Starmer himself be guilty of spreading harmful fake news? Now that would be a turn up for the books, wouldn't it? Our Prime Minister being caught out for breaking his own laws. Not such an isolated event these days, is it? Just to set the scene, here's what Toby Young, the founder of the Free Speech Union, told Patrick Christys on GB News.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. The Pakistani authorities are accusing this guy and his news agency of being the first news source to identify the attacker as an asylum seeker, which we now know was false. But it does suggest that Keir Starmer's analysis, his initial claim that these riots were organised by far-right agitators, many of them from outside the areas where the disorder took place, was itself fake news. So one of the ironic implications of this, Patrick, is that the Prime Minister himself may be guilty under the offence created by the Online Safety Act of knowingly publishing false information which has a harmful effect. I mean, you could argue that by blaming far-right agitators from outside the areas where the riots were taking place, Keir Starmer effectively encouraged counter-protesters, Muslim counter-protesters for the most part, to form mobs, to police areas, to identify and attack people they thought were far-right agitators from outside their area. So you could argue that Keir Starmer's misinformation regarding who was behind the riots contributed to a harmful outcome, and he could therefore be guilty of an offence under the Online Harms Act.
Whoa! When does Number 10 get a visit from the Met then? Sounds potentially worse than eating a slice of cake, doesn't it? Now the lefties are bleating on that the guy in Pakistan didn't actually organise the riots, so there's nothing to see here. But my answer is that it was the alleged spreading of the fake news that possibly lit the blue touch paper. And that is why the judges in the riot court cases talk a lot about what the defendants said online. Had that fake news not been disseminated in the first place, would there have been any riots at all? Had the establishment put correct information about the perpetrator into the public domain at the earliest opportunity, then there maybe would have been no room for false news. I mean, if it's not all down to fake news, then why the huge lefty attempts to shut down Elon Musk and his ex? Anyway, when the recent riots broke out after the Southport stabbings, Keir Starmer and his establishment lackeys were all over it, blaming it on the far right for spreading fake news about the perpetrator being a recent small boat arrival of a certain faith unknown to the intelligence services. Something that was soon found to be totally false. But in the meantime, that fake news had erupted across social media, and the claim was that it was all some sort of far-right conspiracy to foment those riots, with Starmer claiming it was all down to the far right and that they bust around the country looking for trouble. These thugs are mobile, he said. They move from community to community. We must have a policing response that can do the same. I'll come back to that statement in a moment. But last Tuesday we found out that somewhere near the origins of those rumours was, allegedly, a Pakistani web developer, Farhan Asif, who it is claimed spread the fake news from one of his websites, Channel 3 Now, and Asif is based in Lahore, Pakistan. The Pakistani authorities have arrested him for it under their fake news laws, something I talked about in a video at the time. So organised by the far right? Bit of a question mark on that one. And some interesting stats gathered by the Telegraph initially showed that most of those arrested for the Southport incident were from the local community. 7 in 10 of those charged so far live within a 5-mile radius of where they are alleged to have taken part in riots, according to court documents and police forces, it said on the 6th of August. Doesn't sound like moving from community to me. Fake news by Starmer, maybe? Acting on fake police intelligence, maybe? Here's what an unnamed police source is quoted as saying in the Telegraph. Some are EDL, some are more extreme far right. The EDL, here we go again. As I've said many times before, that organisation, the EDL, if you could call it an organisation, was wound up a decade ago. And as I've said before, during his speech in Parliament on extremism in April, Michael Gove did not mention the EDL. He did, though, name 2 far-right groups that no one else has mentioned as a part of these riots as far as I can tell. If the EDL had been the driving force here, surely we'd have heard all about it in those riot court cases, wouldn't we? It would have been bellowed from the rooftops, wouldn't it? So why haven't we heard anything on this? Is it maybe because there is no EDL? So was mentioning the EDL also fake news from our illustrious establishment? Sounds just like the sort of mythical enemies despots conjure up to justify a crackdown on the dissenters, when you're trying to force the majority to do something they do not want to do. If the majority was behind Keir Starmer's grand open borders pay for the world UK, then there would be no need for this, what appears to me to be subterfuge, would there? Now build into this the lack of any talk about finding the person or persons who originated and spread that totally fake list of 100 sites that were going to be hit by far-right rioters. What's happening about that? And why did those 100 riots not occur? Maybe because there was, in all likelihood, no plan to do so. Just a list of sites, possibly designed to spark initial unrest, then make it look like a crackdown had quelled the far right. And the fake news about acid attacks by the far right on those of a different demographic. What about that? Has anyone had their collar felt? No, this fake news all appears to be one-way traffic, all based on whether or not you are following the preferred narrative. And that is not the way to run a country. Well, not one that is supposed to be democratic anyway. Unless you are of a despotic, I am always right and deserve to dictate mentality, and surrounded by like-minded people willing to go to any depths to maintain a power base. But with no repercussions for the misinformation they spread in order to maintain or even increase their hold on the nation. Maybe our political masters believe we have now entered the post-democratic age and moved into a new age of enforced socialism, all for the greater good, you understand, where there are those who deserve to rule and those who deserve to be ruled. Well, I've got news for our budding tyrants. The only thing a politician ever deserves is to be held to account by the electorate at every opportunity. But the aim of this government appears to be to smear and label millions of Brits as far right in the hope that it will stifle all dissent going forwards. The question here is, do you think Starmer was spreading fake news? If so, did he do it knowing it was fake news?